So welcome to the Rebalance Earth Podcast. I'm Daniel Priestley. I'm the host today. Normally it's Rob who asks the questions, but we wanted to put Rob into the hot seat to answer the questions. And I'm very honored that he's asked me to come and interview him and to give you some updates about what's happening with Rebalance Earth. What are some of the big projects? What are some of the amazing innovations that are happening at the moment with Rebalance Earth? And also to learn a little bit about Rob, the founder of Rebalance Earth. And I think you are going to absolutely love what we have to talk about today on today's podcast. All right, let's get started. Rob, I've known you for 15 plus years now, and I've seen you go through some career transitions. I watched you build Redington, one of the most respected, admired, innovative brands in pensions. And then you sold that successfully. You went to St. James's Place Wealth Management and you ran a multi-billion-dollar fund as the executive director. Everyone was talking about you becoming like on the C-suite of St. James's Place Wealth Management, publicly listed company. Would have been very easy for you to stick around and become one of the top executives of that brand. And instead, I watched you decide to go back to startup and basically build from scratch again, Rebalance Earth. And I'm curious, what was the moment where you said, you know what, I'm walking away from all of this glory and glamour and I'm going back to the grit of startup?
Well, I mean, it's never one moment, but I mean, it was definitely 2021, 2022. And you're right, there was a number of things that happened. So at the end of 2021 was COP26. I'd gone up to Glasgow to talk about a new fund we'd launched, a £14 billion global equity fund aligned with climate change, but it was very much focused on electrics, electrification, batteries, and very little about nature. And it was at COP26, they had a couple of side stands. I came across this idea of natural capital. How do we put a value on the price of a whale? What if nature had value? And that kind of got me thinking. At the same time, there were a couple of other funds who were launching these kind of carbon funds around forestry. And I was looking into those as an investor for St. James's Place. But the thing that really tipped it for me was a friend of mine sent me a photo of a glacier, which I worked on 30 years ago. So at university, I studied geography and specifically glaciology and hydrology. And I spent weeks on this beautiful glacier in Zermatt overlooking the Matterhorn. And in 25 years, it's lost half its mass balance, disappeared. There's a photo of where I was stood in 1998 on 200 meters of ice, and it's just gone. And 25 years ago, that was meant to happen in 200 years. And so the acceleration of the change, the reality of what climate change and nature loss means for our planet, and just being a dad, and as cliche as it is, it's one of those things. I mean, it was an easy decision in the end. It was one of those things where you go, which will I regret doing when I'm on my deathbed? And not going all in and figuring out how to solve this problem became a really easy decision.
Presumably you're working in the field with a £14 billion fund. Why not just stay in a £14 billion fund and deploy it where you want to see it go?
Yeah, good question. And it's one I examined. And I'm guessing at St. James's Place launching that fund, I mean, I got an email from Mark Carney at the time, now president of Canada, saying, Rob, this is the gold standard in investing in 2021. But I realized, you know, running a FTSE 100 company, if that's the way I was going to go, that's not the mandate. There are shareholders who want you to do certain things. The organizations are huge. And I suppose having gone Merrill Lynch, well, Deutsche Bank, Merrill Lynch, Redington, St. James's Place, you realize that if you want to move fast, you've got to be a small, dynamic entrepreneurial firm where you can just go all in. And it was at that point that I realized I had to go back to being in that startup phase where you can just spend 100% of your time focused on solving this problem.
So the thesis of Rebalance Earth is that nature is an undervalued asset, and you're looking at it through the eyes of an asset manager. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So I think, big picture, we hear all these stats about how half of our GDP or all of our GDP, our economy is underpinned by nature. And I think people get it, but then they just go back to their day job and carry on. And I was thinking, well, how do we make something an asset class? And when I worked at Redington, we were early at getting pension funds to invest in offshore wind and solar panels. Now, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that was as crazy as investing in nature sounds now. And 15 years later, it's almost become just a BAU activity. Oh, we need to deploy another 5, 10, 20, 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. Let's do that. And a big part of that was convincing pension funds that infrastructure and renewable infrastructure was an asset class. Then it was saying, okay, well, if it is an asset class, we can sort of put it into our investment beliefs. Then if we want to invest in it, we then need to go and appoint a fund manager, maybe Octopus Investments, who can then go and deploy that for us and manage the asset. And really that was the idea, and go, well, if Octopus Investments could do that for pension funds and offshore wind, why can't Rebalance Earth do that, but for oyster reefs and catchment restorations? And this idea that nature is living infrastructure. And that was the kind of the point. And the big shift is that you can invest in nature already. You can invest in nature as a commodity. We cut oranges down for orange juice, or we cut wood down for furniture. What's different about our idea is that we want to let nature recover and be there like a road, like a railway, and we pay for the function it performs: cleaning water, storing water, protecting against flood and drought. And then the clever bit is then, can I then get you to pay for that piece? And that has never been done before. And that's the big idea.
It is a big idea because everyone expects nature to just do this for free. And we've got a long history of nature just doing this for free. But you're now saying, okay, people are going to pay for this. And there must have been a moment where someone had to validate that you're not crazy on this. Take me to a time when someone actually said, you know what, we would pay for that.
Well, probably the big one was when West Yorkshire Pension Fund invested in us, because that's kind of backing our theory. We'd had some family and friends seed round, but they were our seed round in September 2024 that gave us the money to hire the team and also said, we're going to seed your fund to turn this vision into a reality. So I love this TED talk about the second follower. People often think it's the crazy entrepreneur, you or me, starting our own businesses, but actually what you need is that second follower who says, yes, that's interesting, I'm going to back that. So Leandros, the then CIO at West Yorkshire, now at British Business Bank, Darren Ward, the head of alternatives, backed our thesis and invested in us. And they picked up the phone and spoke to a number of water utilities. They called up Plymouth City Council to validate, is the problem that Rebalance Earth solving real? And do nature-based solutions work? And 3, can they pull it off? And to invest in us, you need to believe those 3 things. You need to think climate change and nature loss is here to stay, and it's probably going to be the same or worse than it has been over the next 2 or 3 years. And that causes a lot of economic pain. 2, that peatland, river restoration, oyster reefs is much better than an engineered solution at solving that. And 3, can we assemble the team to actually connect those dots, and a bit like Doc in Back to the Future, connect the wires and let money flow from pension funds into nature, and then get companies like Nestle or Network Rail or SSEN to pay for those ecosystems.
That must have been wonderful that you got that validation from West Yorkshire Pensions. But this is such a complex project. You need, there's political risk. You've got to align a lot of stakeholders. You must have had some other people who you needed to sort of say, this is not crazy, this is worth doing. Like, who else has been around this from the start?
Yeah, there's probably like 3 people that I should probably name. One was Julius Passay. He's very well known with Cushion Pension Fund, a large DC pension fund. And he said, Rob, for this to work, you need to be able to prove to me that companies will pay for nature because they want to and need to, and not because they're told to. And then that links to the second point, which is, I want you to imagine in a few years' time that Nigel Farage is in charge, the Reform are in charge, and they just think all of this is just woo-woo, save the planet stuff, and it all gets ripped off. If you can answer those two questions, then I want to invest. So that's a really important part of our design thesis. Then another person called Hendrik de Troyes, who is the CEO of 91, who I got to know very well at St. James's Place, was sort of pushing me and say, Rob, like, why don't you become a fund manager? You need to demonstrate that your idea works in a world that makes revenues, that makes profit. Having that discipline is really, really important. And then almost at the same time, a good friend of mine that I started work with at Deutsche Bank 25 years ago, Torquil Wheatley, said, look, Rob, you know everyone in the UK, set yourself up as a fund manager. And in the same way that a fund manager has a thesis that, emerging market equities will outperform developed market equities, and then you build a portfolio, do the same. So what's your thesis and what's your portfolio? And do that. So the combination of those three things form basically the design of our entire fund. So we need to prove to pension funds like West Yorkshire that we can make 10% net of fees for them. That's super important. Otherwise, they're not going to invest. The second thing is they want true diversification against the rest of their portfolio. And in the last 5 years, all portfolios are now correlating to US equities and AI. So people need stuff that's uncorrelated. 3, people want something that's resilient or provides resilience to the rest of their assets. This is the thing that Julius at Cushion was really kind of onto, which is if I own shares in Tesco and Sainsbury's and Nestle, if I lend money to Network Rail and United Utilities, and these risks, these climate and nature risks do happen, that might go down in value. So if you can invest in something that is anti-fragile and does the other way, when I invest as a portfolio, I get a benefit from that. It's this kind of idea called reflexivity. So if you can design that, then I can just invest 2% of my portfolio and it protects the rest of my portfolio. And then the fourth piece, which is really important for UK investors, is this idea called place-based investing. If I'm in Norfolk, I'd love to have a project in Norfolk. If I'm in Oxfordshire, I'd love to have a project in Oxfordshire, because then I can really sell that to my members and say, we're using your money, not just to provide you 10% return, but actually to make where you live, where you work, where your kids grow up, a better place to live. And our fund does all of those things. And now we just need to prove it, and then just prove it over and over again.
Help us to understand what these projects look like. You live and breathe it. It took me a while to kind of understand some of these projects. Talk to me about the structure of these. Who's paying? What does the money go to? What am I actually going to see on the ground if I go out and walk the field? If I go and have a look at some of these projects.
Maybe we can cover two. I think, well, let me maybe explain that for this oyster project, and then maybe we can go inland and talk about a big catchment project. But if you were investing in a renewable fund like Octopus and you had some offshore wind, you effectively would have an SPV where your money goes. That will get a license from the Crown Estate. It might need some regulatory permission, and then you'd go and build effectively a wind farm and deploy them at sea. The wind would blow, it turn the blades, it generates energy, and then you sell that energy back. And that money gets paid back to the SPV, paid up, and pays the pensioners. So that is a familiar structure to, certainly to institutional investors.
And for the layperson listening, an SPV is a special purpose investment vehicle.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, no, thank you. So if the chances are most people watching this, probably through their pension, if they're invested in Nest, have exposure to these things. We basically want to do the same thing. So the project that we just talked about, we have a lease with the Crown Estate. We have a special purpose vehicle. It's called Project Luna. But in that special purpose vehicle and off the coast of Norfolk, we have laid 40,000 clay bricks, and each clay brick is pre-impregnated with 100 oyster spats. We've got permission from the Marine Management Organisation, which is part of Natural England. So all of the things that you would do if you were building a house, or have we got the right permissions? Have we leased it? These oysters will grow and the clay bricks will break down, and they're about 2.5 kilometers offshore and about 20 meters under the sea. So you can't just go out and sort of pick them up and eat them. And they will grow and grow and grow. And the good news is that oysters will grow quite quickly, and these are never to be eaten. Once an oyster gets to full health and full size, adult size, one oyster can clean 200 liters of water a day. That's 800 million liters of water. If we do 80 million liters of water every day. But the genius of them is that they are basically the coral reef of the North Sea, and they bring back marine biodiversity. But one of the other projects before we did this is a test case off the coast of Holland. 2 years in, it is teeming with life. Biodiversity has come back. It is just a miracle of life. You just see this footage of what is basically a desert North Sea floor, degraded and grey. And then over 2 years, the oysters are growing and fish are coming back. And it is that marine biodiversity that Nestle wants to pay for. And so after 2 or 3 years, when the project hits certain KPIs, key performance indicators around water quality, around pH, around marine species biodiversity, then Nestle will basically buy us out of that reef. And that's how we make our financial rate of return. And then that money gets used to pay back the pensioners in the West Yorkshire Pension Fund.
Yeah, I've heard it said that if the smartest industrial designers on the planet could invent a water filtration system, they'd invent an oyster.
Yeah.
Like
incredible animals.
Yeah, and also if humans had invented a tree, it would be a very expensive purchase. It would be one of the best, most incredibly well-designed products on the market. So you're essentially taking what nature has taken billions of years to invent, and you're just saying, hey, look, let's leverage what's there and achieve those outcomes that we need to achieve.
Correct. I mean, yeah, we're taking 4 billion-year-old technology and deploying it, and it at that end, it's oyster reefs. But if we go all the way inland, right to the highest peaks, it's peatland. And
what does that look like?
So if I go back to the Julius question, I always think, being an entrepreneur, I always think you need to find customers and you need to deliver them value. And value is either because you're solving a massive pain or you're giving them like a huge gain or solving a huge need. And I thought, what is the biggest pain point in the UK for companies, for people who own assets? And it's water. It's flooding. It's drought, and it's water quality. And that was the aha moment. And that kind of goes back to being a geographer and sort of connecting the dots between what I'd learned 30 years ago at university, what I'd learned about finance at Deutsche Bank and Merrill Lynch and Redington and St. James's Place, and go, well, actually, I can start to fuse these two together. People don't know this, but the UK is the most exposed G8 country in the world to flooding by population at risk and GDP at risk. And so, we've got 1 in 6 homes at risk of flooding. That's going to go to 1 in 4. As we're recording this, there's a report just coming out saying all the banks and building societies are sat on these prisoner mortgages, and no one's really talking about this. A report's going to come out in the next few weeks saying that we've got 1,000 substations at risk of flooding. Now, if you remember last year when the substation caught fire outside of Heathrow, it sent Heathrow, basically it closed it down
I remember.
For a day and a half, and caused huge economic consequences. So 1,000 substations at risk. These substations provide energy to people's homes, to people's businesses. So every day that these things go down is 1 day of GDP lost in that area locally. So this problem isn't going to go away. So that's point one. In fact, in November last year, there was a national emergency briefing. And in January, our joint security forces, not DEFRA, not the Environment Agency, came out and said, UK is exposed to these huge kind of climate and nature risks. So I almost feel sometimes that I can see all of this sort of, if I was in the financial world, like information that I know is going to happen in the next 5-10 years, and yet somehow the market hasn't priced it or understood it.
Well, I think there's a reason for that. And I think that most decision makers who live and work in a city, we're just so detached from nature. We don't think about nature. Nature is something we might see on the news very briefly when a helicopter flies over and shows that there was a flood somewhere, but we're detached from the impact of natural disasters and all of these sorts of things because we are in our ivory towers. You've had this experience of actually working, in the field, literally, and also working with finance. So you're one of the very few people on the planet who's actually quite connected with nature and also connected with finance.
Yeah, no, you're right. People don't really understand that to solve the problem downstream, where the railway's flooding or where people's home, you have to go upstream. I mean, it's not dissimilar from people's health, which is you can take vitamins or stuff, but typically if we want to fix our health, it's pretty easy. You need to sleep well, you need to drink water, you need to exercise, you need to reach the right thing.
Align with nature.
Align with nature. And what in addition to climate change, which changes the shift in precipitation, we have completely degraded our landscape. And so the thing that makes the UK so exposed is, if we go back to 1850, which is when most of our railways and sewers were built, and then we fast forward to today, average or median precipitation has increased 50%. So just think about it. Our railways, our sewers were just not designed for this economy, this population, or this amount of precipitation. Actually, if we take extreme rainfall, the top 10%, that has gapped many, many times. And anyone living through the last January or February will have experienced it day to day, but that sort of cumulative impact to businesses is being felt, but it's not yet being fully reported. And it's that is just beginning to come out. So insight one is that this is a big problem and it's not going anywhere in the next 10, 15 years. And sadly, I think as we kind of creep up to 2 degrees above pre-industrial averages, that problem will only get worse over the next 10, 15 years. The second thing is, and this is maybe the little crazy thing, is that sphagnum moss, remeandering a river, beavers, oysters might be the answer to that, because we're so used to building something. So
infrastructure. It's got to look like concrete.
It's got to be steel. It's got to be concrete. And the reality is steel and concrete ain't built for this environment. And the other thing is, the genius is that what you need is a connected landscape. You need the peatland and the river restoration and the riparian tree. So it isn't all about let's just plant a tree.
Yeah.
It's about having the right landscape functioning the way it should do. And by the way, that landscape might be different between Oxfordshire and Norfolk and Plymouth, which aren't that far away on a global scale. So you need to kind of really ground this at a local scale, both environmentally and economically. And I suppose the other insight that we had is companies are going to pay for nature where it solves their specific problem. So if I took that same oyster reef and put it not in the North Sea, but off the coast of Ireland, it isn't valuable to Nestle. They won't pay anything for it. And so the problem that I think academic economists have is they might say the value of an oyster reef is this or the value of a tree is that. But it'd be a bit like me saying the value of the Ritz Hotel is worth £100 million. But it's not. It's actually probably worth £500 million or £1 billion if it's in London. If I took the same Ritz Hotel and put it in Milton Keynes, it's probably worth £20 million. The same is true of nature. And therefore, our other insight is when we come to invest in nature, we need to start with the demand. We need to find who's that payer. Where's the network rail? Where's the water utility? Where's the district network operator who is feeling that pain, but who will then also pay for that benefit?
So let me see if I can connect the dots. Tell me if I'm right or wrong on this. So I'm imagining a very large organization. They've got infrastructure. They've got something that they've spent a lot of money developing, but it's at threat and they want to fix it. And they think to themselves, hey, we could build a big concrete wall here. We could put some steel up. We could dig a big tunnel or a channel or something like that. And then you come along and say, actually, the fastest, best, cheapest way to fix this is through a nature-based solution, deploying billion-year-old technology like oysters or peats or trees or, those sorts of things. And they say, okay, fantastic. Is that free? You say, well, it's not free. There's a bunch of money that needs to be paid. And like any other project that they would engage with, they say, well, how do we fund that? And you say, don't worry, we've got you. We've got pension funds that can fund that at a reasonable rate. And we can get that done. We can actually bring in the solutions. We've got the experts. We can make that all happen. We can fix your problem and we can bring it together and we can fund it. And that's Rebalance Earth. Where am I right or wrong on this?
I mean, you nailed it. Come and work for Rebalance Earth. But just to unpack that a bit. So a great example of that is the even load catchment that we're working on right now. It's a priority project for the British government, and DEFRA have said we want to fund this landscape. We want to do things differently. Concrete and steel doesn't work. We need to solve a problem for farmers. We need to solve a problem for people's homes. Let's think differently. They also don't have enough money, so they need to attract private capital. Private capital like West Yorkshire Pension Fund and other pension funds who are investing in our funds. They want to attract banks. And so Evenlode is west of Oxford. It's kind of north of Swindon. It's a small catchment. And in that, there's a number of companies. There's Network Rail, there's Thames Water, there's SSEN, who are what's called the district network operator, the substations. There's obviously lots of supermarkets. There's lots of buildings at risk. And we're going to fund the whole catchment. And, this project probably requires, north of £150 million in funding. So none of those companies on their own, Network Rail, are going to pay to do that. By the way, they've already tried building a cement channel or putting out defences. A, it either doesn't work, or B, you're not allowed to, because what you're not allowed to do is put something up that might make flooding downstream even worse. So if I protect my asset and then I put your home at risk, not
You're
surprisingly, you can't do that, rightly. And so you have to cross the companies that are engaging with us now, and what we kind of believe will happen over the next 5-10 years is you have to cross that Rubicon, which is climate and nature risk is here to stay. I'm already losing millions of pounds if I don't fix it. It will only get worse in the next 10-15 years. These nature-based solutions actually work and are better and actually solve multiple issues for us. And 3, there are companies out there who can deliver it for us. So 1 is no one company can sort of pay for it themselves in the same way that most companies can't buy an entire building. They might just lease a floor in an office. And 2 is kind of coordinating it, getting all of the permissions, funding the landscape interventions. So we're working with 57 farmers. We are going to we're going to pay them to farm differently, to stop using pesticides and fertilizers, to focus on their soil health. We're going to re-meander the rivers. We're going to restore some peatland at the top of the catchment. We're going to plant riparian trees, which is the right trees near the rivers to slow down the flow of water. We've got modeling, not just from us, but engineering firms like Atkins Realis that go, yes, here's the problem if you don't do anything. And if you do these things, this will store 1 billion cubic meters of water. This will clean the water this much. And therefore, off the back of that, we can start to charge those companies the money. And so it's no different from building an office block.
Let me drill into the financials here a little bit. Tell me about, if I'm investing 100 million into a nature-based solution, what sort of time frame can I spread that risk over, all that investment?
Yeah, look, typically we're looking to spread that over between 10 to 30 years. So some of the projects are shorter, 10 to 12 years. Some of the biodiversity units that we're creating are over 30 years.
So it's like any investment that a company would want if they're buying trucks, if they're buying a warehouse, if they're buying, any big investment.
100%.
So it's essentially, it's something that a company wants. It's a big investment. They need to spread the cost over 10 years to 30 years. And they also need a team of experts to actually deploy this because it's not in-house. And then I'm assuming there's probably government interest in seeing this done. I know that you don't want to have political risk, but in many cases, these are types of projects that the government's interested in seeing happen anyway. Is there additional benefits there?
Yeah. So what's changed over the last 2-3 years is the government's come out. We know that the government doesn't have enough money overall, and then each department is fighting for that. And so the Environment Agency, which is responsible for flood risk, has probably not even got enough money to pay to fix the past flood defences, let alone protect for the future. At the same time, DEFRA wants to help farmers transition. And in the old model, they would have funded that 100%, which is why companies didn't really think about they had to do that. But we know that there's no more money. And in fact, the government has said, we want to crowd in private capital. So the first transaction that we're working on in Evenlode is probably 70% government funded and trying to crowd in 30% private capital, with a goal over time to make that 50-50, and then probably over the next 10 years to get it to 30-70% the other way around.
Okay. Imagine in the next 3 years, there's a magical moment that happens where everyone suddenly gets it and they go, okay, this is obvious. This is just the way that it should be done. What does that moment look like?
I think it's exactly that. I just think of the Fosbury flop in 1968 where Dick Fosbury runs up in Mexico City and he jumps backwards. Everyone up until that time either did the scissor kick or over the high jump, and he got the world record. He smashed it. And Dick Fosbury wasn't a particularly good high jumper before in the old way. And I just think it's such a good example of a paradigm shift, which is until he jumped that way, it wasn't obvious. By the next Olympic, every single person jumped backwards. And that was the way people did things. Now, something had to change in that they introduced something that you could jump on. So it's not just that he jumped backwards. Obviously, he didn't just jump backwards into a sandpit. There was a big sort of cushion there. So the environment has to change. And I think the environment has changed. Like, what people don't realize is that in the UK, temperatures have increased about 0.4 degrees C in just the last 10 years. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a lot. And what people don't realize is every time that number increases, there's more moisture in the air. So it means every time we get rainfall, like in January, February, we'll have wetter winters, we'll have more intense rainfall. And every time we get drought, we'll have more droughts. So in the same way that the mattress was introduced to allow Dick Fosbury to jump backwards, the environment has changed where it doesn't matter whether you're Tesco, Sainsbury's, Network Rail, SSEN, National Highways, Heathrow, Manchester Airport, you need to do something differently.
In this example, I guess the mattress is the fact that the pension fund's willing to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a number of things. Pension funds are willing to fund it. This problem isn't going away. People have realized that they need to fix it. Government isn't going to fix it.
You can probably model the solutions better than ever with AI.
You're right. A lot of things have come together. So the sort of modeling that we can now do, so the tool that my co-founder Waleed has built allows us to model the flood risk to an individual substation, access roads to A roads, railway stations. So you can start to calculate at a local level, what is your asset at risk? What is your revenue at risk for one day? What do you think will actually happen that will be the moment where the industry looks on and goes, oh, that's obvious, we should have all been doing that? What do you think will actually, like, what are we going to see happen in the world where everyone goes, genius? I think, in a year's time or 2 years' time, we'll have announced this even load catchment. We'll have put those implementations in place. We'll have demonstrated not only do we reduce the flood risk, but we've improved the lives of farmers. They've got more income. They have more resilient farms. The food tastes better. The local pension fund invested. And it was like, wow, this is a no-brainer. Then all of a sudden, everyone's going to go, well, I want my own even loads. Well, come to us. There are over 50 of these landscape recovery projects in the UK, and even load is a small one. And I think the magic will be we need to make it easy to repeat that transaction at low cost in the Wash, over in East Anglia and Norfolk, in Plymouth, up in Yorkshire, in the same way that the Victorians figured out that we need a single rail gauge. It makes it really easy. We need to do the same. And once we do that, then all of a sudden it just becomes a natural flywheel, because pension funds will go, well, I want to invest. Companies will go, wow, this is a cheap way to reduce my risk.
Better, faster, cheaper.
It's also a good story for my customers, because I've reduced the risk to their homes. People's homes are better. And then it just becomes a natural flywheel, and that'll attract more capital, and we'll be able to restore more nature.
Do you think we're going to see a moment where something happens where there is a flood, and those that have invested and that have gone down this path are able to continue trading and they're fine, and those that didn't go down this path, like it's a clear A versus B example? Do you think that will happen?
Yeah, I think that and that will then get reflected in credit rating agencies, and eventually it will get reflected in insurance premiums, where people will recognize A, the risk, but B, where has someone put a solution in place versus where they haven't. And unfortunately, I think that will be quite disruptive on property values and business values, and as people start to go, well, why haven't you put these resilience measures in place?
Do you think a project like the Nestle project, there'll be an announcement where they say, hey, look, our fisheries were in decline, and actually we're proud to announce that they've stabilized and they're back into growth? Or
I mean, maybe in 10 years' time. I think we're so far down that we need to stop it and bounce back.
Yeah.
But the exciting thing about nature, like that oyster reef, is how quickly in 2 years' time
Nature is resilient.
So I'd love to be a point in sort of 10 years' time where the North Sea is cleaner, it's teeming with fish, there are more people with fishing jobs, the communities are better, more people can swim in the sea, the water utilities aren't being fined for bathing issues, coastal erosion is less, stuff isn't falling into the sea. That is our vision for 10 years from now.
Yeah. And I think some of these issues are, you mentioned political risk before. Some of these issues are apolitical. Like no one on either side of the spectrum of political preference wants polluted water. Nobody's so capitalist that they are happy for, pollution to go into the rivers, and no one's, so socialist that they're going to sit there and say, well, unless it's a government done thing, we're not having it. It's almost apolitical.
If it's a local environmental issue.
Yeah.
I think where it becomes political is because if I live in the UK, I can't associate with the rainforest in Africa or in South America. I can't associate with polar bears, and it's just out of my mind. But if I live also, I was speaking to a lady just yesterday, and she lives on that railway line. She says, I know it, I experience it. If you've got people whose houses have been flooded 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times in the last 10 years, yeah, of course they want, as you say, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum, they want this issue
Or if
fixed.
you've tried to catch a train and they say, oh, sorry, it's all cancelled
Yeah.
because of flooding. In order for Rebalance Earth to succeed, you need very smart people with finance backgrounds. You need very smart people with environmental backgrounds. So you got to attract all sorts of talent. Has that been a bottleneck? How are you going at actually attracting geniuses into the tent?
I mean, that was the best thing of last year. We assembled an incredible team. And again, back to West Yorkshire and Darren and Leandros, that investment in us as a company meant that we could go out and hire a brilliant team. So we got like 19 people now. We've our chief investment officer, Yoan Murray. He's a sort of seasoned professional, over 30 years as a finance chief investment officer. On the weekend, he's mountain rescue. He's the real deal. He's rescuing people from floods pretty much every weekend.
What a legend.
Pulling people out of rivers. Sadly, people don't always make it. So he sees the actual impact of what we're talking about. He is doing a PhD in biodiversity. He's got a master in integrated marine management. We've hired Professor Neil Entwistle, who I first knew 25 years ago from the Alpine Glacier Project. And he's the friend who sent me the photo. Now, the thing about Neil is he is the UK's leading river restoration expert. He's restored over 200 rivers. He's won the UK River Restoration Prize several times, the European River Restoration Prize. He is literally an expert in river restoration. Then we've got Kirsty Willman, a COO. She's got a real estate and infrastructure background, so she makes sure we bring all of the institutional discipline of investing in real estate and infrastructure, but applying it to nature's infrastructure. We've got Vidge, who works for her, who used to work with her at Federated Hermes, who brings that. We've hired James Hurrell, who's got a private equity background, but he worked at a firm called Bridges that used to do very similar but social outcomes. So where you put, let's say, youth centers that keeps people out of prison, and then they get paid because they reduce that. So very similar concept. We've got Anne Reaney, our head of commercial, and then we've got Waleed, my co-founder. So the missing piece is not just the finance and the sort of science or the environmental piece, but it's the technology. And so one of our mantras at Rebalance Earth is, how as a team of 20 can we do the work of 40 with the impact of 80? And so his job is to leverage all of our data, all of our technology to make sure that we can, move as quickly as possible.
You're talking about data, you're talking about technology. My mind goes to the biggest trend on the planet right now, which is AI, data centers. Data centers and the data center build out in the year ahead is going to be, in the US alone, $600 billion. We're talking about spending as much as 3 to 5% of GDP annually on data center development. These things have huge environmental impact. This wasn't a major concern when you started Rebalance Earth, but it must be on your mind now.
Yeah, it's on our mind two ways. One is like, how do we use AI? How do we use it responsibly? How can we use it to achieve our goals? But also, as you say, what are the impacts? And people normally talk about energy, but actually just as important is water. is, their water consumption.
The cooling.
And that this is actually more of an issue in the summer in the UK with drought. And what you don't want is a data center near Manchester, and then enough people don't have enough water for their homes or for their businesses because it's all been taken. Now, obviously, the big tech companies are trying to fix that. But yeah, a number of the big technology firms have reached out to us to say, can you map our assets or the assets that we want to build? We want to understand the water availability. So the flip side of flooding is drought. It's actually two sides of the same coin. And they really need to make sure that there's enough kind of water availability. And also, you still need assets that you need to get to. So if there's a flood or if the substation goes down, that's bad for the data center. So back to what we said earlier, companies who pay because they want to and need to. And we need to demonstrate, if you want to put your data centers here in the UK, they might be exposed to some of the risks we talked about. And did you know, here are these environmental issues that can solve that? And then, by the way, when you invest in these things, there's also a good news story that you can tell, certainly to your local stakeholders, your local employees, maybe the local government.
I think that story is going to become more and more important because the environmental impact of data centers, people who are anti-AI, this is one of the biggest angles, that puts the whole technology on a knife edge, that if they can't demonstrate that they can do this in harmony with nature, there's a huge political risk associated for them. And I'm guessing to a degree they see you as a solution.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, it's a license to operate. A, it's a physical risk. B, it's a license to operate. And C, the cost of this is de minimis to what they're spending on chips and energy and everything else. So actually, it's an easy green premium. It's a great way to create buy-in, solve a business problem, for sure.
Strange question for you. Is there a version of Rebalance Earth where you succeed on paper, but you feel it's a failure?
Not really, because as you know, my business coach is Mike Harris, who I met through you, and he always says to me, "Is this a game worth playing, win, lose, or draw?" And one of our goals is to inspire others to follow suit. I mean, we just believe so strongly that this is a big problem. It's going to hit us really. It's hitting us hard in the face now. It's just going to get worse over the next 10, 15 years. And the sooner we can kind of do catchments like even load and then do 3 and then 10 and then 20, the better. And so, I mean, it's back to why I quit my job. I just was like, I have to go all in on solving this. Now, that being said, I am incredibly commercial. If you look at my kind of psychometric testing, my kind of commercial scores are off the chart. And Mike would also say to me that, if you want to build $1 billion company, you need to solve a problem for 1 billion people. And I think Rebalance Earth does that.
Mm. And the philosophy that you bring to the table really is counter narrative to a lot of the people who work in the environment and a lot of people who work on these sorts of projects. They're very, very left leaning, and they want to do it for ideological reasons and almost to hell with the finances. But that's not you.
No. And look, I do get, I have quite a large following now on LinkedIn. I write a lot of posts, and I definitely get a bit of that. Certainly in the beginning, there was a bit of a sort of, who are you finance boys?
Yeah.
And girls turning up. And
there's a trope that this type of a project would be ideologically sound, but where capital goes to stagnate. Is for you, this is not even an option. That this is a wildly productive use of capital.
If you're passionate about restoring nature, which I do think all of these NGOs are, it's hard to argue with that. And at the same time, we know there's not enough money. Sadly, philanthropic money has gone down, either because typically it comes from government grants that have been cut, and at the same time, people at the cost of living crisis, people are giving less. And the reality is the financing gap between what's needed to solve this isn't going to be closed by philanthropy. So I would say definitely 2 or 3 years ago that was an issue. I think we're getting buy-in, but of course I think we need to tread very carefully. We need to demonstrate that this is good for the farmers of Even Load, which it is. We need to demonstrate that it's good for the families who live in Oxfordshire. That's the hard bit, is really proving that everyone's a winner out of this and it's fair.
10 years from now, your kids are in their 20s. You take them for a walk to show them what you've been working on while they were growing up, while they were teenagers. What are you showing them?
We're just walking around one of these catchments, and I think what's cool is that 10 years from now, the UK will be known as the fastest nature recovering country on the planet. So Costa Rica is known as the most biodiverse country on the planet. 10 years from now, the UK will be known as the most fastest nature recovering, and it will be an export. People don't realize this, but the UK is the third largest exporter of cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And people all over the world will be coming to the UK because we've got the best NGOs, the best people who understand finance, who understand how to make this model. And people will be coming and say, please come to the Caribbean, please come to Vietnam, please come to Namibia, please come here, even to North America, and saying, can you implement this model? And it will become an export, and there will be tens of thousands of people enjoying employment in natural capital.
Rob, take me back in time now. I know that as a kid you spent time in Argentina. You had the opportunity to witness environmental destruction, the opportunity to witness financial destruction. And to me, I feel like this really is at the core of who you are. This runs really deep for you. This combining of these two worlds, the world of environment and the world of finance. Tell me, what would that young kid see when he looks at what you're doing today?
Well, I can still remember it vividly now. I mean, it's like over 40 years ago. But I mean, starting with the money side, inflation was running at 30% a month, 1,000% a year. Prices changed every day. We'd go to the supermarket and there'd be a sticker on the foods, and then in the afternoon it would change. And we'd go around the supermarket. My mum and dad would get us to split up, like supermarket sweep, and we'd buy stuff up. That night, we'd drive up to a house that looked like a house out of Narcos. There'd be Dobermans, bars on there. My dad would walk in with his salary in cash, and he'd disappear in the house, and we'd be sat in the car. And he'd come out, and the Dobermans would, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then he'd come back with a pile of dollars. And then we'd go home, and the banks weren't safe enough to put your money in, because if you put your money in the bank, they could just seize it. And so at night, I was 7, 8 years old. We rolled dollar bills up and put them in an old 35 millimeter cans, the film canisters, and then we'd hide them around the house, in the freezer, in the wall, and so forth, because it was safer to have your money in there. The so what of that is at 7 or 8, I really understood inflation. And I knew the exchange rate of the US dollar to every currency in South America. And by the way, they were changing. So while we were there, it was Australs and pesos, devaluing, banks seizing money, and that was the world in which I lived. And it's impossible to live like that, and has had huge problems for Argentina over the last 40 years. At the same time, my dad was head of science at St. Andrew's Scott School, and he'd go on these amazing trips. And I remember we traveled down, and there was this young guy called David Attenborough there filming the Trials of Life and the sea lions and the orcas so there was David Attenborough, 40 years younger, filming the Trials of Life, and just seeing that the wildlife in Argentina is just to die for. But the moment I always go to is the first photo I ever took. It was in Patagonia, by Perito Moreno, which is kind of like the Glacier National Park. You're surrounded by these incredible mountains and this incredible landscape, and this glacier that kind of retreats, that kind of grows and then retreats. And my dad says, do you want to take a photo on my camera? And it's an Olympus camera, and taking a photo is precious because you've only got 24 photos. And my hands are shaking. And it's my mum, my dad, and my sister, and Perito Moreno in the background. And I think, growing up in Argentina was where I fell in love with nature, the environment, the mountains, the sea. And I suppose ever since, that's kind of why I went on to study geography. And sadly, the story of the last 40 years is we've been sort of destroying that environment. So I go and study geography, but it doesn't convince me enough to remain being a geographer. I come here to the city and I work for Deutsche Bank, and I understand derivatives and understand finance, and I'm really motivated to have money. Actually, I'm really motivated, if I'm honest. The reason I started was I wanted to earn a lot of money, and 25 years ago, that was the best way to earn money. And so to be in a position right now, as someone who I work with at Merrill Lynch saw me on the train about a year ago, said, Rob, it's amazing. You're literally just fusing geography and finance together. And I'm just watching you on LinkedIn and seeing you merge those two things together. And the fact that now, we're having meetings with government officials, landowners, CEOs of very large infrastructure projects, the largest pension funds in the UK, and we're building a financial model that demonstrates that you can make nature into infrastructure. It's just mind-blowing. I mean, 7, 8-year-old Rob would be grinning right now.
That's so wonderful to hear. Mate, it's so lovely to hear what you're doing, and like everyone wants you to succeed. We all love the fact that you are who you are. Your team is incredible. You're pulling together these two worlds, and I think we're all going to be better off for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.